Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Patrick Howell is board certified in construction law by the Florida Bar. Patrick has represented condominium and homeowners association clients throughout Central and Northeast Florida. He has successfully argued appellate cases before the 1st, 2nd, and 5th District Courts of Appeal. Patrick won the landmark case of Miranda Homes v. Lakeview Reserve before the Florida Supreme Court, which was a great win for all Florida homeowners associations. Patrick has been recognized by his peers as among the best lawyers in America for construction law since 2020. Among his many community-based activities, he served as the president of the board for the Orlando Youth Alliance and was the former chairman of the Orange County Affordable Housing Citizen Advisory Board. He's one of my partners at the Becker law firm. Patrick, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Thank you, Donna.
Safe buildings start with people who design and build them. So who makes up the typical team of people when a developer is building, let's say, a multifamily residential building or an office building?
So, Donna, you've got the design professional, which would be an architect or an engineer, the contractor, and then you've got the subcontractors. And of course, at the very top of all of that, you have the developer.
So these teams, Patrick, they could be comprised of as few as 3 people, as many as dozens?
Exactly. We have construction cases that involve 30, sometimes 40 different parties when you've got liability for the developer, the contractor, multiple subcontractors, and then maybe a design professional or two as well. Any given project could have many, many dozens of different entities that are working on the project to get it built.
I imagine that can get really confusing for the average layperson. So tell me a little bit about what's the role of each member of this team?
Obviously, the developer is at the top. The developer is the entity or group of people that have the idea about constructing either the neighborhood or the condominium tower or whatever it might be. Then the design professional, whether it's an architect or an engineer, they're hired by the developer to actually draw up the plans. And so if it's a HOA with townhomes, it may be the roads and the drainage, the townhomes themselves, and then some of the amenities. For a building, it's going to be all of the building, the structure itself, any surrounding amenities, parking decks, things like that.
The star architects, some developers like to hire these celebrity architects, and it has some value to put that name on a project.
Absolutely. There are a few that have big names here in the United States and here in Florida. I think Architectonica down in South Florida is a name that everyone's heard of. And yeah, the bigger celebrity name, especially on a high-end, high-rise project where the units are going to be in the millions, the bigger the name, then the more money they're going to be able to get for the units they're selling in those buildings. So there's also the contractor. The contractor is hired by the developer to review those plans and then offer a bid to actually construct the building, the neighborhood, the roads, etc. Sometimes developers will act as their own contractor, and then sometimes they'll hire another company to fulfill that role.
Is there more potential liability if the developer acts as their own GC?
Not really. It just kind of, I think, keeps it clean. They are able to keep everything in-house, make sure that the schedule is followed because they are the contractor. So projects get done quicker, on time, with less delays and less cost. I really think that's the reason that a lot of developers will also act as their own contracting entity.
Now, what role does local government play?
The local government, local building departments, they play a big role. They enforce the Florida Building Code. They inspect. There's also a plan review period where they actually obtain the plans and go through a period where they look over those plans to make sure that the building code is being followed. It's buildable and it's safe. Their biggest role that they take the most seriously is that plan review. There are also later inspections that the building department will have as the project moves forward at all different stages of construction. Their role is there. The ultimate responsibility does fall on the contractor and the subcontractors that are hired by the contractor. But they do have a role. It's just that now in Florida, with the way there's so much construction and as busy as we are with building, our building departments are stretched pretty thin.
If the construction's being inspected every step of the way by local government, why aren't defects caught?
It's really a time issue. I was in a deposition with a building official actually this week, and that question came up. Weren't these townhomes inspected by your office for compliance with the building code? Did they pass? When it got my turn to ask the questions, I'm assuming that your inspectors, their time is limited when they come out to a project. I've heard that maybe in a given week, an inspection team has about 30 minutes for each project within the jurisdiction. And he corrected me and he said, it's actually 30 minutes every 18 days. That's how much time that particular building official in their office had allotted for a particular project. So they are coming out, they are inspecting, but they just have limited time. And sometimes by the time they get to a project, some of the things that they are supposed to inspect have already been covered up by a different trade working. And so they have to take the contractor and the subcontractor's word for it that it was done right.
If the local building inspector misses something, I'm going to ask you about sovereign immunity and ask you, how does that play a role?
Sovereign immunity provides a complete defense for the building official, the building department, and the local government. And so they can't be sued. They don't have liability. Sovereign immunity is just what it says. It's the sovereign. It goes all the way back to England and our common law and the idea that you can't sue the king. And that's how it still is here in the United States. You can't sue local government. They're not a guarantor that the building code has been followed or that the structure has been constructed properly. What the law says is that the contractor, the developer, and the subcontractors have what's called a non-delegable duty. And they have the duty to follow all of those things. There is somebody looking over their shoulder to help things and to hopefully catch things, but they are not the guarantor.
Do any state and federal standards come into play, Patrick, when we're talking about new construction?
Very limited. With the federal level, you've got OSHA, you've got the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They ensure that the workplace is safe. So to an extent, if they're looking out for the workers on a site, a safe workplace will make a building go up cleaner, better, and safer. There's not really any sort of a federal guideline or federal code. Here in Florida, we do have the Florida Building Code. It is our overall standard. If you talk to an expert in this area, they'll say that it's the basic standard, the absolute basement. You can have requirements. Good building practice may actually require that something be built above the building code, and that depends on really what the item is and also where the building is located. They tinker with them every once in a while.
I was going to ask you that. So how often do they upgrade the Florida building code?
Our last upgrade was after Hurricane Andrew. And
that's a minute.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. So it's not something that's done, on a 10-year basis or 20-year basis or anything like that. It's just sort of when people believe that there should be a major overhaul. And that was a major overhaul. And that's that applies to what we call vertical construction. So a building, whether it's commercial or residential, a bridge, things like that. The other state law that we have here in Florida, which is fantastic. It's a wonderful bit of consumer protection, and it's Section 553.84 Florida statutes. And basically what that does is it provides a private cause of action for violations of the building code. That's nice because if a developer, contractor, or subcontractor does violate the building code, and it causes damage to an HOA, a condo, or an individual owner, they have a cause of action. It's one of those things that developers hate and contractors hate, and they're always trying to get that tinkered with and taken away.
So we've been talking about construction, and I think when most people hear construction, Patrick, they're thinking new buildings, new communities. But when we're talking about potential causes of action for defective construction, we're also talking about repair and renovation projects, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've had a lot of growth over the last 3 decades. And some of those buildings that were built 3 decades ago or 2 decades ago, they're starting to get to the point where they need major renovations, balcony restorations, concrete restorations, new roofs. Those are large scale projects. Sometimes it boggles my mind when I get a contract from a condominium client for a balcony restoration, how much that costs. And there can be defects with regard to those renovation projects as well.
Let's say we're doing a large concrete restoration project. Talk to me a little bit about those really thick AIA contracts that some of our clients use.
The AIA is the American Institute of Architects, and they're a very powerful group, and they have developed contracts that are used. They're the standard basically in the industry. They're a good place to start. They've got a lot of the boilerplate that you want in there. You can check a box if you want to resolve disputes by arbitration, or you can check the other box that says that it's going to be through litigation. There's an attorney's fees clause that's included in the AIA contract. So the prevailing party in any dispute would be able to recover their attorney's fees and costs. It's a contract that is developed by the American Institute of Architects, and I'm putting the emphasis on the word architects. So they are very design friendly, and so they're very friendly to architects, and they're very friendly to engineers. So
how consumer friendly are they?
They're in the middle. They're
complicated. Those are lengthy contracts, and they're trademarked, aren't they?
They are trademarked. Yeah.
So what does that mean, Patrick? It's a trademark contract. Can anybody fiddle with it?
You actually have to have an account with AIA to use their contracts, to get the updates to the contracts and all of that. We will actually change a lot of the provisions in there. If you look at a contract that's been reviewed by a Becker construction lawyer, you're going to see a lot of red lines in that AIA contract, things that are taken out, things that are changed. We'll talk to the client about, what their needs are. And sometimes we are representing a developer entity or a contractor. And so we'll actually make changes that are beneficial to them. But most of our work is with HOAs and condo clients and individual owners. And so we'll change the provisions in there that may be somewhat onerous towards them and make them better.
I guess the takeaway with AIA or any contract is folks don't review and sign it yourself.
Exactly. I'm dealing with a situation now, a dispute for a condominium client here in Orlando. They've been a longtime client of mine. And I get this call and they say, Patrick, we're having issues with the contractor that we hired to put in our new lobby floors. So I'm thinking to myself, lobby floors, what was this, a $20,000 contract? They sent over the contract. I got air quotes up right now because it wasn't really a contract. It was literally a 2-page proposal for $130,000 worth of work. They had just signed a 2-page proposal and it was terrible. There's no prevailing party attorney's fees clause. So if I have to sue this contractor, even if I win, we don't recover our attorney's fees.
Incidental damage is always a big one that I see when you sign a proposal. A contractor is never going to voluntarily say, by the way, if we screw up and we damage things, owner's property, portions of the common elements, we'll pay for it.
The contractor, they have their own lawyers as well. And they've been looking over those agreements, and they've got them a sort of a boilerplate contract that has terms in there that benefit them. So you've got to have a lawyer look over a contract, especially for a high-end renovation. Anything over $50,000, you really need a lawyer looking it over. This condominium client in downtown Orlando, they thought they were saving some money by signing the contract and not reaching out to me. And in the end, they're going to spend a lot of money, a lot of attorney's fees with me trying to fix what could have been fixed at the beginning. My father has a name for that. He calls it stepping over a dollar to pick up a nickel.
But I have a cautionary tale from one of my clients. They spent less than $5,000 to get the French drains in their roads to have them cleaned out, right? Well, the company that came out used the wrong method And a contract that I think it was a $2,500 cleaning contract cost them thousands and thousands in damage. So sometimes it's not even about how much the contract amount is. You have to look at what are they doing and is there any potential for serious damage?
If you've got a situation where the contractor coming in could really damage, even if they're cleaning something, if they could damage that item so that it has to be replaced or somehow repaired, and you don't have a clause in there that at least includes an attorney's fees clause, so that if you have to sue that person, you'll get to recover your fees and costs, you're going to be in trouble.
What if a board only hires a general contractor, but the repair project requires a certain amount of retrofitting to bring the building up to current code requirements? Is the GC equipped to advise about those requirements, or would that be an engineer's obligation?
General contractor is going to have limited knowledge on, the new code requirements. They're going to have less knowledge than an engineer. An engineer, they have continuing education requirements. Their license depends on those continuing education credits. Having an engineer review the plans, draw up the plans, first of all, and review those plans to make sure that the code is also being considered, the new code. Let's take a window replacement project. We just talked a little bit ago about the changes in the building code that were post Hurricane Andrew. One of the main things that was changed was the window requirements and the impact resistant glass that has to go into windows now. A GC comes along and they order windows from Arizona that doesn't have hurricanes. Those windows might be completely the wrong thing. And an engineer is going to be the best person to oversee the project, make sure the general contractor is doing what they're supposed to do, including upgrading everything to meet the current code.
On the large projects, Patrick, the associations have what's called an owner's representative. Is that typically an engineer? Is there anybody else who could serve in that role?
It's typically either an engineer or an architect. They'll serve in that role. You've got to have somebody that both has that design background, because they're going to be reviewing the plans, they're going to be looking at the construction, and they're going to be assuring that the construction meets the plans. Okay. So having that design professional background, I think, is key. But you also need somebody that's just really organized, that has the time to go out on a project, that has the time to review everything, wrangle contractors and subcontractors and sort of pull them by the nose. Hey, look, you did this wrong. You got to have someone that's assertive, because these contractors will push back and they'll say, no, it was done right. Oh, that's not really a big deal. Come on, let it slide. And so you got to have somebody that's assertive. A good administrator will actually pay for their fee in the savings that they realize on the project.
For the communities, Patrick, that have professional management, what role do they play? Now, sometimes I see in the management agreements that they address repair and renovation projects, and they've got the manager playing a role. I often wonder if the manager wants to play that role, because the manager still has to deal with 9,000 other things going on in the association.
I have seen that as well. Just backing up a little bit with what we do and the clients that we represent. One of the things that our practice group, or construction law practice group, prides itself in is not only will we handle a dispute for a client and get them money, either through jury verdict at trial or through a settlement. But then once that money is received, we actually will walk them through the process of making the repairs and assist them with the contract review and all of that stuff. That's one of the things that we do in a pitch to a client is we're going to take you from A to Z. Right now, you're at the beginning of this dispute. We're going to make sure that we get you all the way to the end and work with you to make sure the project gets done on time and properly. One of the things that I will do is I will try to insulate that property manager from having to do a lot of the wrangling, any sort of role that really should be handled by an architect or an engineer. They are busy. They've got other things going on, and they're not qualified to say, yeah, this stucco was put on correctly, or this balcony restoration looks to be complete. The role that I envision in a project for the property manager is really just facilitating entry. We've got to get into the units on the 11th floor on Friday the 18th. And so they'll facilitate that.
So I have to ask you, what are the most common construction defects you've seen in new construction?
For our townhome communities here in Florida, we have pervasive issues involving stucco. It seems to be something that is very, very difficult for contractors and stucco subcontractors to get correct in Florida. When you're putting stucco on the second floor or the third floor, that system has to be done exactly right, or else you get water behind the stucco. The water can't get out, and then you begin to have wood degradation and rot. We've got clients that their condominium buildings or townhome buildings were completed in 2015, 2016, not that long ago, and we're opening up the walls and finding just completely degraded wood beams and members and plywood. And so all of that has to come off. You got to support the buildings with new structural wood members, and then you got to put the wood back on.
In the vertical construction, what about the balcony pitches and the windows? I hear a lot about water intrusion.
Oh, yeah. With a high-rise building, keeping the water out, especially if that high-rise building is near the ocean, which a lot of them here in Florida are, because everybody wants that view from their balcony, right? You've got to keep the water out, especially when it is salt water. And so you got to have the balconies slightly pitched so that the water, if it gets on the balcony surface, flows off of the balcony and then down and off the building. And then the same thing with windows. They've got to be installed correctly, and they've got to also keep the water out. I actually have a project right now, and it was a renovation project. One of our competitor law firms handled the construction defect case, got them money, and then, like a lot of law firms do, they just walked away. And so the association was left with sort of taking the money and then making the repairs. The contractor hired a window subcontractor, and they started having these problems after the project was done. And so they called me up and they said, Patrick, can you come out? They had installed all of the windows upside down. It happens, and it's unbelievable that it happens, but this sort of stuff happens all the time.
Could the average person look at that window installation and say that was done incorrectly?
No. These are things that you have to have an expert eye. The only thing that the average person, the homeowner or maybe a property manager that's walking around and looking at the buildings, the only thing they're going to know is they're going to realize the problem once it's manifested itself. That may seem simple, like, oh, didn't they notice it immediately? Sometimes this water, it'll get in the walls and it will stay in there and you don't even realize it. You just start, why is it so humid in here? You'll hear owners ask us that. I'll go into...
or mold. Why do we have mold?
What is this black stuff on the windowsill? What's going on? I've gone into units and dehumidifiers are running. And so I'll ask them, hey, what's going on? Oh, a couple of years ago, it just was really humid. We got these things and we're running them. And I'll say, well, how often do you have to dump the water out? Oh, like 3 times a day. And I'm like, guys, this is not normal. You should not have this much humidity in your unit. There's something going on here. And then we'll start the process of looking. We'll have an engineer open up the walls and they'll find stuff in there that you would not believe.
So we know we need engineers. How does the average community association find these engineers? How do they evaluate? I imagine it's like any other industry. There's great ones and not so great ones. Where do they go?
You can lean on different organizations. The Community Association Institute is great. And they have engineer members for all the local chapters. Another source is going to be your friendly community association lawyer, because that lawyer will be able to hook them up with a construction lawyer like me. And so depending on the locality, I get emails all the time from lawyers like you in the firm who will say, hey, Patrick, we've got a project here. We're looking for an engineer or an architect. Who do you recommend?
We know we have a problem. We found a defect either in new construction or, as part of our repair project. Patrick, how much time does the association, we're using Florida as the standard, but if you're listening to us in another state, you would check your statute of limitations. How much time does the association have to assert its rights?
So it's 4 years from the completion of the work. And that's for an open and obvious defect. If it's a hidden defect, we call that a latent defect. So let's take something that maybe is covered up by another trade. Maybe it's the roof trusses underneath the roof. You're going to have 4 years from the time that that defect was discovered or should have been discovered. With that 4-year period for what we call a discovery period, there's an outside deadline of 10 years that you can't go beyond. I tell clients all the time that are approaching that 10-year period, we need to have a review, a top to bottom review of everything, because you've got one chance to bring a claim against the developer, the contractor, and the subcontractors, and that deadline's about to run.
Yeah. Yeah. But litigation is so intimidating. Even the threat of litigation can be very intimidating for most people. What factors do you advise boards to consider when evaluating whether or not they should pursue a construction defect claim?
Number one is what is the size of the problem? A lot of times I'll have a client that will have a defect, have an issue, and they'll say, Patrick, what do we do? And I'm a construction lawyer. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. So I'm not able to, I certainly have seen things and I can look at it and say, it looks like it might be this. But what I'll ultimately say is, let's bring in an architect or an engineer to determine how big a problem this is, because there's no reason to pay a lawyer $50,000 to fix a $20,000 problem.
Right.
Once you know the issue, then you can decide what to do next. If the board doesn't have a stomach for litigation and has millions of dollars set aside in reserves, they may say, Patrick, thanks for your help. We're going to resolve this on our own. And, please review the contracts. Most clients don't have millions of dollars sitting in reserves. So they'll come to me and they'll say, Patrick, what do we do? How are we going to recover this money? It is $3 million claim. The architect just told us that. And now what do we do? So we've got several options here at Becker. We handle cases on an hourly basis. We'll also handle cases on a contingency basis if the client doesn't have those millions sitting in the bank.
When you're evaluating this, and let's say the architect or engineer has come back and said, the forensic engineer you mentioned has said, this is a $3 million claim, and you're within the statute of limitations. The association does not have those reserves, where they can address it. And frankly, I have to tell you, Patrick, even if they did have money sitting in reserves, I still think if the developer created the problem, the developer should be paying for it, not the people who've paid into the reserves. So my next question is, how do you evaluate collectability? A lot of these developers, they create, single purpose entities, shell companies. Is there insurance? How do you figure out whether or not if you get a judgment, you're going to be able to collect it?
Really, really good question. The shell corporations or LLCs, limited liability companies, that was something that when I first started practicing 20 years ago in this area, it was a real problem. And what a developer would do is, especially with these, with what used to be really popular, which was a condo conversion. So a developer would come in, buy an apartment complex, slap some paint on it, say it's a condo, convert it into condos, sell units. And, there would be problems and issues later. We would come along and sue that developer. And the guy would say, can't touch me. I'm an LLC. It's a single purpose LLC and we have no assets. And it would create issues. Now, there are ways around those issues that I'll discuss in just a second. So we were still able to get a recovery for our clients, but it was difficult. What's happened now is banks are a lot more savvy with the way they lend money now. And so if a developer comes along and says, hey, SunTrust, I want $20 million, a loan to develop this piece of property. They'll say, okay, we need all the information on every entity that you've ever been affiliated with, as a board member, as a managing member, as a registered agent, everything. They'll get all that information, and if there's a red flag on, some bankruptcy or a judgment that hasn't been paid or satisfied, they don't get the loan. And that helps us tremendously in this area. And I'll say that at mediations, when that flag goes up, hey, we're a single person LLC. I'll say at the mediation, so you're never going to develop ever again, huh? Wait, what? No, I've got a plan over here, And so I'll say, you need to talk to your lawyer, because you're never going to develop again if I get a judgment from you that remains unpaid. And then they'll come back and say, oh, well, here's some money. And they'll push it across. So that's been nice. That's been a nice change. And I applaud the banks for realizing that. And it's also a technology thing. You can find out anything about anyone nowadays, using using LexisNexis, using Westlaw, the internet. And that's been a wonderful thing. The other part of this is that, remember, we're not just suing the developer. We're also going to sue the contractor. So the contracting company will be a target as well. Many times they have insurance. And then we can also, if we have to, we can sue the subcontractors directly. And those subcontractors generally have what's called CGL insurance policies, commercial general liability insurance. It's great insurance, and it pays out. When we go to a mediation in one of my litigation cases, we'll have all of those different subcontractors lined up. We know everything about their insurance policies, and we'll have all of those insurance adjusters at the mediation. And so they typically are the ones that end up, in the whole scheme of things, paying generally about 75% of any given claim.
Do you ever discuss with a board, Patrick, what the downside is for them not pursuing a viable construction defect claim?
Yes, I do. In any situation where you're talking about litigation, which could take a couple of years, and if you're paying hourly, it's going to be expensive. Even if you're on a contingency basis, there's going to be mediations with a quorum of the board. Depositions by the board president that they'll have to attend. So there will be some footwork that has to be done by those board members. So I will tell them, that there's going to be some work that they have to do, and there may even be some money they have to put out if they're not going to move forward on a contingency basis. But what I'll tell them is that you've got one opportunity to initiate a construction defect claim and go after the liable parties. And after that 10-year period runs that we talked about before, you are not going to be able to go after those parties. The money is going to have to come from another source. Now, that source, one of which we already talked about before, so it could be the reserves. But does anybody really want to exhaust their reserves to pay for a construction defect that was created by somebody else? Reserves are there for general maintenance. They're there to replace the roof after the end of its useful life in 20 years. They're not to replace the roof in year 7. The other source of the money is going to be a loan. So, that's what I'll talk to the board about. Do you really want to take out a loan and have this obligation for the next 5 years, to repay this loan? Are you able to get a loan? What's going to be the interest rate? How much are you going to pay? What sort of premium are you going to pay on that money? And then the final source of money is the dreaded special assessment.
I knew you were going to say that. The two dirtiest words in community associations: special assessment.
Yes, exactly. And there's no easier way for a board to get run out of town on a rail than to pass a big special assessment. Sometimes they're inevitable, but if you can avoid it and you can actually initiate a claim against the responsible parties, To me, that always seems like the best option, unless there really is something at play, such as a bankruptcy outside of the statute of repose, so that you really can't bring the claim, or some other reason.
Patrick, I have kept you talking so long, and I appreciate it, but you had so much good information to share. Just last question. You've been doing this a while. You've been handling these claims. Is there anything that continues to surprise you?
I guess it's the greed. The greed surprises me. It's kind of like, how much is enough? I see developers and contractors cutting corners to save a buck, and at the end of the day, they're putting their reputation in jeopardy, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. At the end of the day, our reputations really are the most valuable asset that we have. And so I wish more developers and contractors felt that way.
Patrick, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciated it.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.